Welcome to our condominium workshop, our series. As many of you know, I'm Mayor Dana Goldman, and very much we live in condo land, and this is definitely something of great interest to our over 90% of our residents in our city. So it's nice to have our next condo workshop here in City Hall, albeit virtual for the time being. So I wanted to do an introduction of our esteemed panelists. Our chief building official, Mr. Clay Parker, who needs no introduction given his vast background and resume and expertise in this area. And of course, our wonderful and very capable and expert assistant building official, Paola, who will be also presenting, I'm sure, in this topic. So thank you so much for being part of this. Certainly, always the impetus for this workshop and the series that preceded this, of course, was Champlain Tower South, which was really a watershed experience in our area and reverberates actually throughout the state. So in the aftermath of the Champlain Tower South tragedy, again, the question always arises, is my building safe? So we're going to go through an overview of past, present, and future, where we are, how we got here, where we are today, and what we can expect in the future. So Mr. Clay Parker, and then you'll introduce. Can you describe or highlight the current certification process as it affects our condominiums here in Sunny Isles Beach?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Currently, our buildings have to be recertified after 40 years from their CO, and then every 10 years thereafter. And we've been doing that for the past 20 years since I've been here, and there's so much going on between the different boards that are looking at this issue. Going back to June the 24th of 2021, when the building collapsed, it really shook up the. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Several boards were put together. The Bar Association, the state attorney's office through the grand jury, our Dade County mayor put together a board to look at it. The engineering board of the state of Florida has a task force, and I've been involved with most all of those task forces, and we still don't have any final clarity of where we're going to end on this, but we just receiving from Tallahassee some of the latest bills that are being proposed, and it looks like we're coming to some kind of a conclusion of where we're going to end up, and it's going to have a big impact on the whole state of Florida. Right now, the way currently, Dade County and Broward County are the only two counties in the United States that have a 4-year recertification requirement. That's going to be modified. It's already, some of the meetings that Dade County have held are bringing that down to 30 years. The latest bills coming out of the state of Florida, out of Tallahassee, the Senate Bill 1702 is within the 3-mile range of the ocean, is dropping that down to 20 years and recertification every 7 years. So we're not sure if this is going to be the final bill, but it's being applauded in Tallahassee, and it looks like it's probably going to be something similar to this is going to pass. Mayor, you're more into the main bill is going to be, I guess, Senate Bill 7042, and and I know you want to speak about that, but 1702 is being adopted into that Senate Bill 7042 as is going to be the main bill, and the 1702 is going to get adopted into that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about timelines, right? So we have the 40-year recertification process that exists in Miami-Dade and Broward County, and then how that works in a certain way, right? You get a notice requirement for your building, then you have a certain time to get an engineer's or an architect's report. And can you describe a little bit just timelines as they exist today, and then what are the anticipated timelines when this, and presumably this new legislation will be enacted? How that's gonna differ and why it's important.
Well, the timelines, currently, we notify the buildings 2 years prior to their 40-year recertification requirement. And I think we're the only community doing that. But there's talk of having us notify the buildings within 3 years of their requirement. But the bills, none of these bills give the building that much time to get, once we issue the requirement for the recertification, it doesn't give you that much time to deal with it. So you have to, the building managers and the boards have to get on this pretty fast. So that's why we try to give them an advance notice of 2 years, and
So,
not to be 3 years. But and there's little that we can do about giving additional time, and it's getting harder and harder in that respect to give these buildings additional time. Once we issue a permit for repairs, that's a different story. But up to the point of the condo boards funding the repairs that need to be done and getting their contractors lined up and applying for permits, that's a pretty tight window that they have to meet. But then once we get the permits, that gives them, we have to give them the times within the permit of 180 days between inspections. But that has to be ongoing, an ongoing job, that the repairs have to be done in a timely manner.
let's talk about that a little bit. It's the timely manner. So essentially, if this legislation passes or these timelines change, or how does that affect what's in the building code, or what happens? The Tallahassee passes something, and then the building code says you have X number of times to notify, and then X number of times to make the repairs, X number of timelines to complete those repairs.
Well, yes, once it falls under the permitting process, it falls under the Florida Building Code, and the clearest statement there is you have 180 days between inspections before the permit is inactive. But it's a requirement for every building official to see that the repairs that are being made in this respect are done in a timely manner. So we have really not that much guidance within our code beyond 180 days. So we have to we require the engineer, the special inspector engineer that's doing the reports to us, send it to us on a bi-weekly basis. And if we see that falling behind, then we deal with the engineer on that. But some of these repairs take a while. I've had some buildings the repairs have gone on for a couple of years because it's substantial repairs that need to be done. We've got a few buildings that right now that are under major repairs.
And what about extensions and extensions of those? Will those change at all? Will you have discretion to, grant extensions on those repairs and so forth, or you see any of that changing?
I see it getting tighter. I see that the requirements are going to make sure that very little forgiveness is going to be for extensions. It'll be a requirement to get all your ducks in a row, to speak of, and get your contracts, your bids out, and find your contractor and to get that initial permit. So I don't see us giving many extensions, especially, and this is going to be now. Right now, it's just Dade and Broward County. This is going to be the whole state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The Tallahassee is putting this into our codes for the whole state of Florida. There'll be no state has done this, and we're going to have big shortages, and it's going to require for threshold buildings that you hire an engineer that has a threshold certification, and there's going to be a big shortage on structural engineers. My best advice I can give the people that are on this call is to go out now and get your engineers and companies lined up that you want to deal with on this recertification, because there's going to be a big shortage in structural engineers throughout the state.
Is it possible that engineers or other experts will come in from other jurisdictions to help out, or you think it's supply and demand, whatever's here exists and that's it?
It'll be whatever's in our state for structural engineers, and we have a shortage of structural engineers as we speak. I have a hard time just getting my structural engineer for structural plan review, which Dade County is the only county that requires that I hire a structural engineer, PE, to do a structural plan review. We're the only county in the whole country that I know of that has that requirement. But it's hard to get people to do that because there's a shortage on not just engineers with the structural designation that were tested under structural. And it's gonna get worse. So I would suggest people go out and make a commitment with some of the structural engineers that are currently working in our area.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the proposed new timeline. So under SB 1702, which has actually been now been incorporated into the new bill, the successor bill, what are we looking at in terms of coastal communities or, size of projects, coastal communities, and inland condominiums? How is that process going to be shortened?
Well, right here it mentions that multifamily residential buildings that are greater than 3 stories in height must have a milestone inspection performed by December 31st of the year in which the building reaches 30 years of age. And that's for other communities besides Sunny Isles Beach, because we don't have any buildings that every one of our buildings are within the 3-mile range of the ocean. So what that says, it says the owner of a multifamily residential building that is greater than 3 stories in height and is located within 3 miles of the coastline, as defined in 376031, must have a milestone inspection performed by December 31st of the year in which the building reaches its 20 years of age from its CO. Based on that date, the certificate of occupancy was issued, and every 7 years thereafter. So that's immediately, if they pass this bill, I can see that our department will have to go
Expand?
into, I will have to go into and inspect every building that probably every building that's in our city.
Well, let's take a step back, because let's define, because that is going to be the new state, that is going to be the new state of the art, right? What actually is a milestone inspection, and how does that differ from the current inspection standards? I just want to read the definition in the bill. Milestone inspection means a structural inspection of a building by a licensed architect or engineer authorized to practice in the state of Florida for the purpose of attesting to the life, safety, and adequacy of the structural components of the building, and to the extent reasonably possible, determining the general structural condition of the building as it affects the safety of such building. The purpose of such inspection is not to determine if the condition of an existing building is in compliance with the Florida Building Code. That's kind of a lot, right? That's a pretty broad statement. And how much, putting aside the aspect of, well, instead of a 40-year recertification for Sunny Isles Beach, now we're looking at a 20-year recertification and
Yes.
7 years thereafter. And this goes into place for older buildings that were CO'd by 2024, right? Putting aside that aspect, how does this milestone inspection kind of protocol differ from the current inspection? What can we expect?
Well, I think it's the milestone inspection is going to be. I really believe it's going to be tweaked to say that it must be because we have rules that are already in place, statutes that are already in place that a threshold building has to be inspected by a threshold inspector. So I think the word the milestone will probably be tweaked to show that so it can stay in compliance that the inspections on a three-story building or higher be done by a structural plan reviewer or structural engineer. That's if it's a threshold building that he's certified in the thresholds section.
So the fact that
I don't think it'll stand that an architect can do that. You know?
So it's a higher standard, right? So it's really what you're saying. It's the type of inspection that's going to take place, rather than through a structural engineer, and that an architect would not be capable of performing that level of inspection.
Right now, the way it's written in Chapter 8 of the Dade County Code is an architect. It also states an architect or an engineer, but the way they view that at Dade County is that, I'll give you an example. I have some two-story buildings that still have to go through that same requirement. And we've had some done by some architects, okay? And that's been allowed. But anything of that's considered over 3 stories or higher, we've made them use a structural engineer.
So the life safety components, is that going to be a broadened inspection process, or it's just that if a structural engineer is in charge of that, it's going to be a better outcome, a better understanding of the safety of your building or the integrity?
Yes, the structural engineer looks at the structural components of the envelope and the structure of the building, and from the foundations all the way up to the roof. And it's going to be to meet our threshold laws. It'll have to be done by an engineer that has the threshold certification.
Sounds like associations are going to have to budget for that, right? Sounds like it's going to cost a lot more money to take care of the structural engineering or other components, right?
Not really, because not more. Right now, it'll be more often, but right now, we require that buildings like Winston Towers or buildings that are more than 3 stories are being done that way now by a structural engineer.
Okay.
We're not allowing a architect to do that 40-year recertification.
Okay. So we're expecting, to really increase the pace by which buildings are going to be inspected. And that will, of course, will add on that component of the newer buildings, right?
Yes.
Of the 92 or over. So we're really looking at getting more and more buildings into the cycle of certification and reinspection, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
And it's going to have the impact. It's already had an impact on our department because we're really not geared up to do these step up the inspections on the buildings. And after June the 24th, we started a program to go back and just re-inspect some of the buildings that we had concerns of. And I've talked to our city manager, and we're really looking to start a new division within our department called Existing Buildings Division. And it'll deal specifically with existing buildings and their maintenance and help coordinate with code enforcement better. And I think it'll make for a smoother. Our primary goal is to give service to our buildings and to help them jump into action on all these changes that are going to be taking place. So hopefully we'll be able to form that new division, and but like I said, this is not just a Dade County issue anymore. It's going to be the whole state of Florida. So everybody is going. I talked to the building official of Dade County, and they've already tried to hire 8 or 9 more inspectors because they're going to be dealing with the same thing. And all these cities that are bigger than we are going to be out. They're going to be trying to. So right now, it's hard to find an inspector. It's hard to find an inspector, and so we're diligently working on talking to some of our peers that we know and trying to get. We need to get more people.
Let's talk a little bit about transparency, records access, official records, because I often get requests from residents, hey, if there are reports out there, can I see it, or do I have a copy? Under the proposed legislation, and I believe on the horizon, at different levels, even at the county level, we're talking about the availability of these reports. So, the elected officials, we get these requests like, okay, is there an engineering report? Where is it? So currently, the process would be if I'm a condominium owner and I'm in a high rise, right? I'm a unit owner, and I know my building is subject to inspection because of the age of the building. The only way to get that engineering report is I have to fill out a public records request, or to the extent that there's a website mandate through the Florida Condominium Act, if there are over 150 units and they post it, maybe it'll be on my website. But I think that's the current process, correct? That they have to get right. You're not just giving out those reports to unit owners who call you. They have to go through some sort of a process. What do you see as the change? Because one of the tenets of this legislation is that the milestone inspection reports are part of the official records, and some of these inspection reports, right? They have to give it to you. They have to give it to the board. They have to give it to the unit. Where do you see that falling out, and where do you see the availability of these records in the future?
Well, I think we really need to talk to our legal department, because when does it become official record? I mean, when it's in for review, is it official record yet? Not till we accept it and approve it, and does it? I think that it becomes an official record once we take it in and accept it. So that's some of the questions you're asking are better answered by our legal department.
I think we have somebody in legal on this call, don't we? I think we do. But I think the idea is that under this proposed legislation and moving forward, we're going to see more availability, not at the city level, but more availability at the condo level of these reports, because people want to know, is my building safe? What's in this engineering report? The report may not be on the website because it's not required to be, or maybe, but there will be more accessibility to this information, right?
Most likely, there's going to be more accessibility, and like you said, condo boards are going to be setting up open files. I think that people will be able to look on that. I don't know. This is a question that we really need to have our legal department answer.
Well, if anybody wants to chime in here, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. And hi, everybody, Valerie Vicente. So as he indicated, there's both provisions that are or an ordinance in the county that's being proposed, providing for additional access to records. And so we don't know where that's going to end up. It hasn't been formally adopted, but for example, one of the things that they're going to have to provide access to is all reports within the last 10 years concerning the structural status of the properties. So those types of things would have to be provided and accessible, and the county would be maintaining the registry, again, assuming it gets adopted. Whether something is a public record, in this case, if they're providing reports to the city and cities in possession of them, they're a public record.
But there's a process to go through. It's not like we have them posted on a portal. They have to go through the city clerk's office to obtain copies of those records. They can't call Paola or Clay and say, "Hey, I want to see what's going on with my building," right?
There's no requirement that they have to go through the city clerk. They can go through the building department, but ultimately, yes, it would be forwarded to the clerk who would process it as a public records request. There is no repository with the city that I'm aware of right now that people can just access that information.
Okay. But we see that as something that, could change it in the future, possibly, right? Through the county or the state laws.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie.
So in addition, let's talk a little bit about reserves and what you anticipate. I know we just got a copy of this new proposed bill, but one of the major questions always in this idea of certification and who's going to pay for these deferred maintenance obligations and critical or other major capital repairs or capital items, how are we going to pay for it, right? And so what came to light very vividly in Champlain Tower South was, hey, they had reserved $700,000 for what was a complete and utter collapse, right? And so where are these buildings in the spectrum of being able to afford or pay for these repairs, right? And what's going to happen, and how is it going to be done through a reserve funding mechanism or not, or waived? Or I think that's a big issue for these condominiums.
And are best addressed by their legal representatives. What this code that's evolving, the best thing it'll do it'll make a condominium board and their building management see that the building is properly maintained. And the way you get to where you need $14 million worth of repairs is the lack of maintenance over the years. So I think eventually this is going to be good for all of our buildings, and everyone will step up and do better maintenance of their buildings. That's what we're hoping for. But as far as the condominium boards and how they collect their monthly maintenance and what they do with it, it's better answered by our legal team.
Absolutely. If anybody wants to chime in on that subject, but I will note that what the interesting feature in this new bill that just circulated was we have currently, right, and Valerie, you can chime in at any time, but in my understanding, currently the associations are only required to put reserve schedules in their annual association budgets, but there is no requirement to collect reserves for deferred maintenance, right? Or even to do a reserve study. Now, reserves in theory pay for these deferred maintenance items that we're talking about, right? That's the subject of this certification inspection process. But there's no legal requirement to collect reserves because in fact, every year, unit owners in condominiums, they can waive those reserves in whole or in part. And so the idea is how are associations going to pay for deferred maintenance? And will Tallahassee require that either reserves be collected or have some partial reserve funding, or what is now floating out is a alternative funding mechanism, right? In lieu of that, in order for the buildings to be able to pay for these repairs, really, because that's ultimately the issue. How are we going to pay for what we find, right? It's all good and well to inspect and say, hey, you've got spalling, you've got cracks, you've got this, you've got that. How are we going to pay for those items, right? So, go ahead.
I was just going to add, no, that's something that's kind of outside the scope of the city's, jurisdiction. Ultimately, that's something that the condo association will have to seek guidance from their condo association attorney on how they can comply with these bills if in fact they're adopted. So in terms of, the funding plans and reserve funding obligations and special assessments for these repairs is, something internally that they would have to accomplish that the city does not get involved in.
That's absolutely the case, but the city, in order to keep up with these new mandates, right, for inspection and certification, there is that component that if you're going to make these repairs, you got to pay for it, right? And you got to find a way to pay for that. And that's true. We would defer to all the associations and their counsel for that idea. Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. Clay, you have any thoughts on the expanded kind of inspection process that you foresee in these buildings? Can you talk about things like waterproofing and life safety systems and what's on the horizon?
Well, I think it's all going to be geared for that and a better envelope maintenance, making sure your buildings get properly waterproof and painted through that goes a long way. There are some buildings that are in excellent condition because they did proper, the thing is you need to keep the ocean air and the weather out of these buildings. And the best way to do that is proper maintenance. And I've been on, like I mentioned, I've been on the committee with the Bar Association, the Florida Engineering Board, the State's Attorney's Office, which I can't talk about, and we all had kind of like the same wish list to look for more accountability with the owners and the more accountability with the inspectors, making sure that the special inspectors have the to notify the building departments when they find something wrong with a building. And hopefully with everybody's input coming into the state and these new state regulations come aboard, it'll probably address almost everybody's wish list as far as trying to make this a better program. to help maintain these buildings better. That's what it's all about. It's all about building maintenance and being able, like you said, to fund the maintenance on these buildings every year.
Can you talk a little bit about the Miami-Dade grand jury report and, you know, the findings?
I cannot. When you go into the grand jury report, you're sworn to secrecy and you can't talk about it at all. So I'm going to talk about that at all.
So you served on the Board of Rules and Appeals, or you testified before?
I've worked on some committees with the Board of Rules and Appeals, but I've worked on the committee with the State Bar Association and the Engineering Board. And with I'm on the executive committee of the Building Officials of Florida Association, and they asked me to serve one more year. I've been through the whole thing. I've been held every office, and then I finished my duties with them, and they asked me to serve one more year as a technical advisor for them. So I'm serving my last year with them on that. And we were going to Tallahassee this last weekend to encourage our senators to pass the bills that we supported. And my wife came down with COVID, so I couldn't go, but I'm still on that executive board there.
Mm-hmm.
I will pass on to our whole community, whatever I find out.
I think.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Hi, good morning, Mayor. Good morning, everyone who's attending. I did want to add that and I don't know, Mr. Parker, can you mute yourself for a second, please? I think you're there we go. Thank you. Sorry, I just can't hear. We're right next to each other, so I can hear the feedback. Sorry about that. After all the meetings that they have with the 40-year recertification, and the Miami-Dade County Grand Jury did come up with a document, a very long document, and they have 40 recommendations. And I think it's important that we touch on some of these recommendations, as I feel that the associations need to start preparing for. At this point, as Mr. Parker mentioned, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to be approved, but we do know that there is something coming very soon in the horizon, and we want to make sure that associations are ready for when this happens. Some of the things that they talk in these recommendations is that if association would have to waterproof the exterior buildings every 10 years. So they will be required, according to the recommendation, we don't know if this is going to happen or not, but they will be required to waterproof the exterior building surfaces at least every 10 years. And is making the associations also conduct a maintenance basically like a maintenance inspection of their building, and they have to report to the building department every 12 months. So this is something that not that is going to happen. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, we don't know, but this is some of the recommendations that they have, that on an annual basis, they be required to certify to the building departments that they have done structural maintenance to the buildings every 12 months. So they've gone through certain, I guess, points of maintenance for their buildings. They're also imposing a duty to report to the professional engineers, to the condominium board members, to the architects, meaning that if they go through an engineer and they are told that their building is not in a good shape, they're imposing this duty to report. So as the mayor was saying earlier, there is going to be more transparency, because associations are going to have to report this to their unit owners, to the residents, and they will also have to report to the building departments. And as Valerie was saying, once we receive those documents in our building department, it will become a public record, meaning that anyone from the public will have access. Obviously, we have a process for that to happen, but once it's in our possession in the city, the public will have access to those documents. So, it's important that the board in our recommendation, basically, is that the board starts communicating more with the unit owners when they have more knowledge, when they know what's happening. We received many complaints in the city that people try to reach out to the associations, and unfortunately, they don't get any answers from the associations. So they come to the city trying to seek those answers, and many times, unfortunately, we don't have those either. also regarding the what the mayor was saying regarding the reserves, one of the things that we were also reading in those recommendations is that they're trying to take from the statute the part where they can reappropriate those reserves, and anything that is basically set up for maintenance purposes has to be kept for maintenance. They cannot reappropriate those funds that they have for any other purpose that is not the maintenance of the building. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of some of those points. I know that those are at the 40, but some of the ones that we felt were more important.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful, and that's the meat on the bone, so to speak. Can you envision that there will be more standardized reporting processes, or they will have checklists or forms, and they will kind of augment or broaden, I think, or create more uniformity in the inspection process, the reporting process? Do you see that? There's been a lot of discussion about that, even in the Florida bar recommendations, right? About creating like uniform standards of
Uniform standards. That will happen when everything evolves as to what our final code is going to say, and I think there will be, out of tragedy comes good things, and we'll have more standardized forms for doing your inspections and doing your maintenance. I was also on the committee with BOMA, and
BOMA is the art. What is BOMA? BOMA is the engineering, the largest engineering.
BOMA is the Board of Property Managers.
Oh, BOMA is the property. I'm thinking BOMA, the engineering. Okay.
Right. I was on that board, and they were talking about exactly that, to get more standardization and forms for checklists and for these buildings to have a better system. So that's all going to happen. Yes, ma'am. It'll evolve.
Let's talk about waterproofing, because I know that waterproofing was a big issue for the Florida bar, right? So how important is waterproofing in your opinion, and could it have done something, or prevented some of the tragedy that occurred, or how does the department feel about the waterproofing and how that's going to change? I mean, that's more than just paint, right?
It's more than just paint in most cases, but paint is also a method of waterproofing. I mean, when a building's properly painted, it's a sealant. And but right now, our codes, we require, concrete that's like your balconies are properly waterproofed. And
the balconies, but not the building. Basically,
the building is waterproof by the paint that's put on it, but that has to be properly maintained. You can't wait 25 years on a building and expect that the paint is going to keep the building sealed. But paint and waterproofing.
So, in other words, the proposed standard would be a maximum of 10 years to repaint, right?
Well, these are recommendations made by the various committees, but we'll have to see what the final law says on that. But that's a good idea, and hopefully that'll be brought forth.
Mm-hmm. But waterproofing will be
every 10 years.
Right, but waterproofing will be a big part, and that's so important, right, for the coastal buildings.
For building maintenance, it's so critical that you have proper waterproofing and roofing. Your roofs are well maintained and your building's properly painted and waterproofed.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be part of the, into the new code.
Paola, do you see that the waterproofing is part of the current sort of protocol, or it's not typically included, or when the buildings go up for repairs and so forth, or?
Go ahead, Paula.
Sorry. Yes, it is. I'll say every time it's hard because when they do a concrete restoration and they have to work on the exterior of the building, part of that concrete restoration process and the recertification is waterproofing and painting the building. So it is part currently of their 40-year process.
So how will that change? So it's just, what you're saying is it's only part of the 40-year. It's not part of, say, every 10 years, you're going to have to do painting or waterproofing, right?
That's
Yeah.
the code, but it'll be more emphasized that there will be a better system of tracking that. But it's already in our code that you have to properly maintain your building and paint it and waterproof it. But there'll be a system in place, hopefully, that will better manage that for the buildings and make sure that they get that done. Yeah.
And also a difference is that in their recommendation, I mean, obviously, as Mr. Parker says, this is not all set in stone, right? This is just their recommendation is not into law yet, but the difference from what they're doing now is that this is gonna be a requirement every 10 years. According to the recommendation, this is not something that has been said, but according to the recommendation from the grand jury, Miami-Dade County grand jury, one of their points is that they want to make that painting and waterproofing of the exterior surfaces of the building a requirement to be done every 10 years.
Let's talk a little bit about phase 1, phase 2, that concept of, the difference between visual inspections and, destructive or visual inspection kind of testing, looking at the overall building visually, and then getting into more kind of destructive or, overall testing and inspections. I know that's part of the proposed legislation, at least in SB 1702. Do you see more and more, inspections and so forth and testing going to be, moving into that area of if we see something and then we're going to have to go a little further and expand on what we're seeing, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Okay, so when the tragedy happened in June of last year, we initiated a visual inspection of all the buildings, especially the ones we had concern of. And that's an inspection that our inspectors, our structural inspectors, went out and did. If they found something visually that we saw that, like rust or spalling concrete or anything that we found visually, then we required the buildings to hire an engineer to do a report on it and an inspection on it. And we addressed those issues, and we're having them get permits for the repairs that we found visually. Is that what you're saying? And
But in 1702, they talk about, if you see something, now you have to go to the next level,
right.
and you have to go to more in-depth inspections and so forth, and testing and so forth.
And that's what we're doing. Yeah, if we see something, then we report it to the building and then require them to get an engineer to do a destructive test on it, whatever that engineer determines he needs to do to make the repairs.
So in other words, we require it today, but there could be an additional codification of that kind of protocol or that process.
That's right. Depending on the final outcome of everything, we could be having to visually inspect buildings more often, but I think if what we get in place, I think you'll have, it's going to get the attention of everybody, and we'll have a better protocol of how we're going to do our inspections on these buildings.
Any other thoughts, any comments? I know I wanted to touch a little bit on, what is all the buzz in the, in the condo arena is, about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, basically who are kind of control the secondary mortgage market and, the financing and availability of mortgages, right, in the country. Now Fannie and Freddie have said, hey, if your building has these in need of critical repairs, or, has deferred maintenance that, items that have not been completed, we're not going to insure, or you're not going to have the availability of these, these types of Fannie or Freddie, back mortgages. That is very significant because that means that, people who want to buy a unit in a condominium that has some structural defect or some structural issues, they're not going to be able to get easy mortgage financing. So for those types of buildings, it could ultimately impact, how people get mortgages and get financing, and how these buildings, how property, moves. So it's a significant item, from that perspective. But you have any thoughts on that, or, what's going to happen, or is that going to make, projects less affordable to buy or sell, or?
Well, I'm not a real estate person, but this would be, I think, more in the area of our legal department again. I don't know, Valerie, are you still there? Do you have anything you want to say about that?
I am still here, and candidly, I'm not that familiar with that. Again, that's kind of outside the scope of what the city does. That's something maybe a condo association or lawyer can weigh in on.
But it's definitely something that the condo association lawyers are, mulling about and talking about, because if a building is not repaired currently, if there are structural issues and the building is not repaired, then there's a whole process that will take place in order to, get, have financing and so forth. But I absolutely do defer to the condominium associations and the attorneys. I just want to point that out, that, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have also weighed in on Champlain Towers, and that will impact, that will impact the financing of or the ability, of mortgages in these condominium projects, to the extent that they have structural issues or structural repairs that are, pending and so forth. So I think that's, that's part of this process, so to speak. I think it's very interesting, what's happening. I don't know if you have any other comments, or we have any other questions in the chat or anything like that. But I wanted to, again say, where do you see us on the horizon? If this goes, if some of these changes take effect, what do you see as happening, to the city and to the whole inspection process?
Well, I see that we're going to move forward in a better way. It's going to be it's going to be, once we get our Senate bill settled and see where we're going to be at, we'll have a better line of communication with our existing buildings and the building managers, and hopefully it can be more of a, we'll need more meetings like this. I applaud you having this workshop, Mayor. I think it's something that needs to be done, and we'll maybe as this code develops, and as the procedures and the protocols develop, and that we could keep this line of communication open and update everybody as it goes.
Okay. We do have one question. Felix Lederman from Winston Tower 700 has his hand raised, so I don't know how can we unmute Felix, or?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for taking my question. I want to say thank you, very grateful for such a webinar, and appreciate the work that we do with the building department as we go through the 40-year certification project as we speak. And the building department was very instrumental helping us and navigate in the right way. My question is in regards to the balcony waterproofing. So notice there's a lot of balconies in our building. Our buildings are covered with tile, and tile specifically on the cantilever balconies, adding extraneous weight, additional weight. Waterproofing or not, that's a separate conversation, but how you want to address that additional weight that the balcony has not been designed for?
Felix, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Well, when the balconies are originally designed, they're designed with capacity to be able to handle tile. They're designed to be able to handle your railing and tile. So when they when they try to tile a balcony, it's got more than just a weight issue. It also helps in retaining moisture and stuff. So we try to make sure that the balconies are properly waterproofed. And where it could get into some design issues is if you go from an aluminum type safeguard railing to the heavier glass railings. And that's when we really take a look at balconies and the cantilever balconies to make the engineers determine whether or not the cantilever balconies can handle that additional weight. But I think every engineer will attest that these balconies, the cantilever balconies, when the buildings are designed, they're designed with extra capacity to be able to handle the tile. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay. Unless we have any other questions, I think, I don't know if we have any other questions from the audience. As we do have one in the chat, as the code develops, will each building have different deadlines to meet the inspection requirements as they do in New York City? Buildings are assigned a deadline based on their block and lot. That way there is not an influx at once to have all inspections done and submitted at the same time.
That's a good question, Mayor. We have to look at that. If all of a sudden we have all of our buildings are coming in at the same time, if it goes down to every 7 years, we might have to look at some of that timing issues. But yeah, I'll look into that.
I think that's a great question. I think that's really, we're going to have, if in fact these standards, and then so Cynthia had that question, but I think as these inspection requirements are codified, we're going to have quite a few additional required inspections and certifications, right? There's going to be a big jump, right, of certification requirements in these buildings, because it's going to expand way beyond. If you're going to have a 20-year interval, so forth, it's going to add on a lot to the city. And then Peter asks, what if the building is 3 stories high?
Well, if a building is still 3 stories high, you're still going to have to go through the recertification process. Depending on the final outcome of the state statutes that are changing. But right now with Dade County, a 3-story building still has to be recertified every 40 years. So we'll have to see where that comes out. But I would say definitely any commercial building will have to be recertified. But we'll have to see if it falls under a different timeline.
So commercial meaning office buildings and so forth, but we currently have 2 stories in the plazas in our city, but any office building will fall under that criteria, right?
We do that recertification with them now at 40 years.
Okay. Taylor writes, we have received our engineer's report for our condo building, and it lists several repairs that need to be made. Our building is only 25 years old, so does that mean we should be expecting the repairs to be made before the recertification process, or does our board association have the opportunity to wait until the building is 30 years to act on the repairs listed in the special engineer's report?
My advice would be, if you have an engineer giving you an engineer's report that you have repairs that need to be made, we would, we would require that they get permits to make the repairs now. You don't wait till 20 years from now when it's a lot worse. You take care of your maintenance repairs when they arise. So you would want to address that now.
All right, that's it for now. I will say we did have a very effective 40-year recertification PowerPoint and presentation many years ago. So it looks like in the future, if this presumably the legislation will be adopted, if we're going to have a new 20-year certification process, we'll have to do another webinar on just what is entailed in our new 20-year certification, because that looks like where it's going, right?
We'll be prepared for that, and we'll do that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, I don't know. I think we've hit our timeline. I want to thank very much our city, our wonderful building department and officials, Mr. Clay Parker, Ms. Paola Vila, for participating and contributing. And again, look in the future as this legislation moves through, and depending on the governor's signature, that we would be now evolving towards a 20-year recertification process, at least for our city and our coastal community, and new protocols and expanded reach, right? Thank you. And more accessibility of records, and more, certainly more.
Mayor, if I may, I'm sorry, before we close, we had come up with a few recommendations for the community. And I want to, just before we close, I want to share that with the public, just so they keep in mind, based on everything that's happening, it's good that they have these few points in mind. So, Leah, if we go to the next slide, please.
Excellent.
There we go.
Excellent.
So this is just because we want to make sure that everyone is prepared, and they prepare right now. So it is very important that all buildings, I just heard the question about the 25-year-old building. And, our recommendation is that those repairs start happening now. So it is very important that the buildings regularly and proactively address any needed repairs. And also, obviously, that they obtain permits for those needed repairs to ensure that they are completed properly and per code. It is also important, as Mr. Parker explained, that they start retaining their professional engineering company that can advise them. It's going to be very difficult to find engineering companies, and so it's very important that the association starts having a relationship with one. So we recommend that as well. Also, communication is very important, as we said before, with owners, residents, tenants, so they understand what this process is, and when they start being when you guys have to start getting your assessments, they understand why the assessments are happening. So communication is very important. And also start planning financially. These are hectic and very big maintenance and financial burden to the owners. So it's very good that you start planning financially now before you have to go through all these maintenance and repairs. And the next slide, I just want to make sure that everyone has our building department's information. This is our email if you have any questions, our phone, our hours of operation. We also have some information regarding the recertification process on our website and on our page. So feel free to give us a call, or to go to our website and get more information. And we're always here to serve. So it was our pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. Thank you, everyone. I think that concludes our webinar
Oh, thank you.
and workshop. Thank you so much.